Welcome to Threads of Enlightenment, a podcast devoted to helping you overcome challenges in your life that prevent you from becoming the best version of yourself. Each episode features interviews with people from all walks of life about their journey of self-development and the principles they utilize to overcome their fears to achieve their desired outcome. Ready to be enlightened? Here's your host, Ken Primus.
I always wanted to kind of get the energy of it. I've had, like I said, I've had some very interesting experiences, but I love people in their diversity, and that is part of my mission, to bring people together from any color, any background, it doesn't matter how crooked or straight or, I'm very passionate about understanding and seeing people as they are.
Yeah, the color of the house means nothing.
Yeah.
When you drive in any neighborhood, see different colors of homes, but that's not important. We now recognize, oh, that's a yellow house, whatever. But when you get inside the house is when you start looking, going, well, this is, so here we go.
It's such a candy then to bring out who is behind that house. It's
Yeah.
such a candy.
Yeah. Flavor of life, girl. Flavor of life. You ready?
Yes.
Welcome to another episode of Threads of Enlightenment. As usual, I always welcome my guests because I know they're coming with a couple of things I deem very expensive. I really do, because I learned the value of time. And every one of us is given an offer of 24 hours. How we utilize that time, it speaks volumes. As you learn to recognize the power, the beauty of time, it will change your life. I am telling you. Learn to value her. The other is the journey. The journey is a powerful creator. It has created the individual that is before us. And I cannot wait to get a chance to engage in conversation with Daniela, to extract some of those things that she has been offered through her journey. Those things are wisdom, insights, all of those things. And so we want to honor her and say, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Oh, it is such a pleasure to be here today, Ken, and to also share with your audience. I'm very excited.
It is my pleasure. And the question that I always ask my guests, as you have heard, and that question is based on the fact that we go on several journeys, independent journey and then the interdependent journey where we serve. How do you serve mankind?
Well, I serve mankind, whether those are leaders or youth or just people from any walk, to break through the limitations of pre-planning, pre-societal conditions, to be able to align with the highest version and timeline of who they are, living their life from the inside out, guided from the seat of their soul.
Yeah, that is beautiful. It's always wonderful when I have an opportunity to sit down with folks to crystallize their vision, their purpose, the thing that drives them, that gives them passion, if you will. And I love how you explained your vision, your purpose on this planet. And that is all of us. We have to learn who we are. And we are living in the inside. The house is just the house. But the custom here is to go back, because the reason why I do this is to give the person some insight into their birth, their modus operandus. How did they begin to think this way? How did they begin to navigate their relationships and so forth? Because in the first location where we reside for a short time is the family. And those are some of the skill set that we will acquire there. We learn who we are, begin to get some glimpse as to not basically who we are, but what they're telling us who we are. But then when we are in our room, we have some glimpse, if you will. That little child will have some glimpses as to who they are. And then the adults come and say, you can't do that. What was your family unit like?
Well, I was just going back in time, having grown up in Switzerland, where I was born and raised. It was born in a very small town called Saasballen in Switzerland, and very, very rural. So we're talking perhaps, I think, 250 people at the time. And I was born with a midwife. And my mom is taking me back to, she was always telling me, we just had dinner, and suddenly she has started to have contractions. And but the midwife was telling Dad to go boil water. And she's like, your birth was just like your personality. You're like, okay, let me out, people to see, places to go. And I think I was born within 4 hours. And she said, I was just kind of like, hello,
Wow.
me out of here. I'm ready to go. And I think I was privileged, even though it was very, very simple there, but I was surrounded with nature. It was absolutely beautiful. Nature and water and animals. And even though I was born and I probably had jaundice, my mom was telling me people from the neighborhood came to see the yellow baby. Which was funny, you know? So, yeah, the yellow baby. And supposedly the doctor said, well, this one really wants to live because otherwise, I guess I would have crossed back over, you know?
Yeah.
Growing up in the house of my father, if you know, not to go into the Bible per se, but growing up, again, the house of our father and mother, right? That is our first conditioning, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think growing up within that family unit, I was the youngest of four. My father and I, we shared a very strong kinship in the sense of that he saw life, even though he was born in 1927, he saw life from a very large perspective. He was very much a global thinker, and he felt very connected to nature and the animals. And he would take us into these walks into the highlands where he would remind us, you know, to listen to the silence, to hear the birds, right? Now that's one part. The other part of it was my parents they left everything behind. They went to the bigger city. They went from door to door and they built an entrepreneurial business. And so they very much, and I've been an entrepreneur for nearly 30 years now, they very much enjoy business and creating business relationships. So I grew up in a house with 3 other siblings, and I was the youngest. And my mother, in the latter part of her years, called me the neutralizer because I ended up translating these different personalities that did not think the way I did, that did not really necessarily understand what the other one was saying. So I found myself constantly in a state of translating and equalizing to what they were saying in order for the unit to somewhat harmoniously work along.
You had an opportunity to be exposed. I love when people say, you know, they were amongst nature and where the animals were and the quietness of that and some of the gifts that you acquired as a young woman in the company of your dad, teaching you the art of listening and to be aware of, if you will, because that's what listening is. You are aware of. And when you are in dancing with one of the greatest teachers uh, given to man, which is nature, to be there and to mingle within that space for me is always been, because I love nature so much, is one, has been and will continue to be one of my greatest teachers and one of my greatest places to be taught. And the impact of that. Here is this young woman. She is exposed to that, exposed to the fact of entrepreneurship. And I think once one is exposed to that mindset, because entrepreneurship is a mindset, the product or whatever we used to become an entrepreneur, that's just incidental stuff.
Well said.
Mindset is what an entrepreneur learns. Now, being there and learning from this, talk to me about some of your relationship skills that you started to develop being amongst these teachers. How did you communicate with yourself first? And how did you communicate with others, mom, dad, siblings?
I love that question. Such a great question because it all starts with interpersonal, with personal and then interpersonal and then interconnected connection. And I think the success thereof or how successful are really depends on your inner dialogue and interdialoguing then within all of those different units, connecting these dots. And I think that is, I mean, I've been blessed in many ways to grow up within that unit, even though I still have hair. At the time when I grew up, I was like, are you, even later on when I was going back, because I was very close to my parents, particularly my dad. He was the first love of my life. And so even then, I would go back and translate with my siblings as I was taking care of my parents, traveled to Switzerland like 3, 4, or 5 times a year. But what I learned and continue to learn until the day I leave is there is nothing more important than listening to your own self and hearing what is that voice saying of who you are and where you belong and who you belong to. Because I think sometimes we have false alliances or false loyalties. And that can really mislead us. If I would have listened in quotation only to the voice of my parents and their need for me as the family diplomat to stay within the unit, and at times their pleas, like I said, we were very close, and yet here I lived across the pond in the United States, California, I would have never left. So from a very early age, I dived into studying, read a book called Destiny as a Chance by the German author Thorvald Detlefsen. And in Destiny as a Chance, for example, I was reading this at 14, I dived into what is destiny? How does it serve us? Who makes it? Am I a victim of it? Can I create it? Who am I in this? Who am I to be in this life? Who am I to reveal in this life? It's just like Michelangelo. I already am. What layers do I need to peel in order to reveal? Peel and reveal. And this is funny. That's where Norman Peale comes in. And so at 17 or 18, when I moved out to the dismay of my parents and left everything behind, I mean, I was still staying in contact with them. I came across and I did fall in love with this older man. And I read his book again and again. And I underlined, just like a Bible in yellow, this part and that part of the power of thought and intentional action and deliberate alignment, and to feel at time I could have not worded it to be taking inspired action. So there I learned to be much more the creator of my own destiny. And then as I was continuing to understand myself, of course, to the dismay of my parents, it let me far away and to explore the world as at large, because that's what it is. That also then allowed me to interact with my siblings and the people around me from, I guess you may say, from that place of greater understanding, the interconnectedness of all things. Now, within that, Ken, there was a feeling of being or feeling alienated. And that because I felt very connected to so many things. I didn't just see the color green in the trees. I felt the color green. I still do. I was very sensory perceptive, open, and available. And yet the people around me felt oftentimes like they were going around like robots. And I felt like I did not want to do that. As I was 17, 18, that was like the worst to me. It was like, oh my gosh. And then I had to come to realize that everyone just has a different purpose, But it really instilled this deep, purpose-driven passion to help folks unify within their own self. And that reminds me of my first book, High Performance Without Pain. Habit 3 is acceptance and belonging. So as we continue to dive deeper into acceptance of our own self and revealing, peeling back the layers of who that is, and then recognize, how do we fit into the human puzzle? How do we fit into that puzzle?
14 years old, you started to be exposed to some deepness, if you will, that normally any adult, any person is not usually gravitate to, and until much later on, as one enters into a crisis, if you will. Then we began to look into data like this 14-year-old and 17-year-old was exposing herself to. And as you accumulated all of that data, you began to see, like you said, you weren't comfortable looking at all the others. All the others, most of us are in, as you said, we're like robots because we've bought into the program. And so once we are bought into the program, we are doing what we are doing. You at 14 and 17, somehow there was a glitch and you weren't, you didn't plug in, if you will, and you began to see things as you, are navigating life. As someone at 17, I know that must be a lonely place for you? Because as an adult, when we start our journey, we have spaces of loneliness because of, accumulation of data. How did this 17-year-old girl manage that? Because I didn't go on mine until I was in my 30s, and I had spaces of recognizing the robots and stuff like that, and realized that a lot of the work requires a degree of solitude. I don't want to say loneliness, solitude, that one has to embark on. How did she manage at 17?
How did she manage that? I think I kept in forefront of my person, my being, the joy that was stirring me, that was moving me. And so I very much, and still to this day, am super connected to Mother Earth, to the Mother,
Yeah.
and hence my work in gliding you home, a dolphin stream of a new Earth. So I very much continued to tap into the bonds I shared with animals, nature, and how it was talking to me. Because I felt, like I said, I felt very connected to it. But I think what was moving me forward, my parents understood that I had a vision, even though I did not know how to arrive at that vision, because I'm new on planet Earth. If we would have gone to the other side, it would have been a much easier journey. But planet Earth, I mean, I was walking these steps like a kindergartner. I'm trying to figure out people. Where it's like I was used to manifesting in a much quicker, much more rapid fashion, and here I was, and everything was going so slow. I was used to a different speed. So, what I was doing was intimately connecting with that core of myself and following that inner drummer. And my mom was very instrumental. My hat goes off to all the parents who are able to nurture their children that have a vision, that have a purpose, and demonstrate that they have that, and help them along the way without telling them do this, do that, and trying to imprint or project onto them of what they ought to be doing. So for me, it became movement. So again, there's part of my personality that is very, hence the name of my business, that's vibrant and joyful and feels alive. Yet the other part of my personality is very, and it's all one and the same, is very still, is very quiet, is very deep. That is, if you were to just see me as a speaker being animated by the energy I feel of the people I work with, that's one part. But the other part is the depth of diving deep into that womb that birthed us, that we are now birthing from, the vision that we are to reveal the goodness of God and the God self within us. And that passion was so deep within myself, and it still is, that I kept on stirring it and going deep. And I embraced the loneliness, I embraced the solitude, and became increasingly present.
Yeah.
Habit
That's
one in one of my books. Sense.
Yeah.
It will use anxiety, pain, and chaos, because that's the only place where I would find the space between the space of the spaces, the gap where I could find footing.
Yeah, I think it was Miles Davis talks about the space between the bars in music, how important that is. As this young girl, I'm stunned at how she became such a student, if you will, a disciple, because I tell people the disciples are the ones that are going to be studying, because the ones that are not disciples, it's a passing phase. So when you become disciples, you dig deeper and you want to find out all the answers. And as you get closer to the answers, you realize that, wait a minute, I don't know anything. And so you have an opportunity to expand. Here is this young girl. I mean, just delving in. You're growing up, you're heading into quote unquote your adulthood, and we are told that college is the next stage, if you will. What stage or what college did you pick, and why did you pick the field of study?
Great question, Ken. I think because of my ability to connect with people, because I oftentimes saw people, but I saw past their presentation. And so I always I saw their greatness oftentimes and always believed in their best. And I saw their best oftentimes that I was very good in with relating,
Mhm.
being highly empathic. Yet, thank God I do have pretty healthy boundaries nonetheless. But being highly empathic, I was exploring as I was coming out of main schooling first with working with handicapped children or adults, physically and mentally, studying psychology. So I went to these different apprenticeships, which is in French, it's called stage. And stage means where you go for 3 months and you explore that profession. You're being guided by the people that are there. And so I did 2 or 3 of those in terms of physical therapy, working with handicaps. I'm not quite sure what that's called in trying to find the translation between what it's called in Europe and here. Working, like I said, with the mentally, physically handicapped. It's in the social field for sure. So I ended up and having always been very much of a creative and an artist at life in many ways, because I would oftentimes, I grew up in a very, very musical family where my parents played the accordion and my dad played the piano, and everyone got piano lessons, and so did I. And the teacher told my dad, well, if she were to sit down long enough, she could actually have some talent. Never worked out. But I had very much the spirit of music and lightness and laughter moving through me. And that has really been my saving grace throughout my entire life's situations.
Yeah.
So I think because of that, and as I was growing up, I would sing oftentimes and open the windows on Sundays when everyone was gone, and singing operas and dancing and moving. Very alive child, not hyperactive.
Yeah.
I had the spirit of God moving through me. Like, I'm like, people, can't you see what we've got here? It's a really nice show.
Not many people get a chance to see it at all.
And I was just like coming out of my seams sometimes. Now, with that said, I'm not saying life wasn't challenging, because, like I
Yeah.
said earlier, I did not feel like I fit in. I was always trying to understand everyone else, because certainly they did not get me. With that said, I ended up picking a profession, and I became someone that was a movement dance therapist,
Mhm.
using and working within the psychotherapeutic use of movement.
Yeah.
So I went to a private college in the city of Basel, Switzerland, where I studied movement and dance and also psychology and kinesiology. And those were my first beginnings. So I went there. But before I went there, Ken, came to the United States, and it was around 18, and I thought, you know what, there's more to life than this. I need to do a little exploring, and being an explorer of the universe, so to speak. And I decided I'm going to go to Canada. And then 2 of my girlfriends said, why don't you go to California with us? And I said, okay. So then I was in California for 6 months. I had just passed the entry exam to that school. And so off I went. And then when I went back, I started this college. But when I came to the United States, Ken, what was so interesting, we left Switzerland, and it was very cold it was on a January 1985. 1985, one of my girlfriends, she couldn't even take a shower because the pipes were frozen. Before we went, we went to the airport and took the plane to the United States. But when we landed in San Francisco at the time, and we stayed in Stanford, I remember this morning like it was yesterday. I stepped out onto the balcony. I'd never seen palm trees. I looked around and I saw the palm trees, and it was like the air was softer. Everything was so palpable. I looked around and I'm like, my heart was open, my eyes were open, my ears were open to, like, this is a different energy.
Yeah.
Than living in Switzerland. And that got me infected with this excitement of realizing there was more to life than just living in Switzerland.
So once you were exposed to the fact that there is more to life, and changing location is always a good thing, I think it affords us the opportunity to stretch a little longer and stretch wider and deeper, as if you will. How did she adapt?
Well, when I was here, the first 6 months, that was before I ever moved, which was years later. I think California at the time everything was different. I loved it. And as much as it was intoxicating in some ways, everything was different. Okay. But long story short, we were up for that. All three of us girls, we were very different personalities. And yet, thank God, all three of us, we were quite street smart. And, street smarts goes a long way in life.
Yeah.
I'd rather work with somebody that's street smart than book smart. So, I ended up falling in love. And years later, I returned to the United States to actually live here. And once I embarked upon the work journey and all of that, I realized, wow, I thought I was only going to California, but everything was different, Ken. But people didn't get my jokes. And I had a pretty good sense of humor. I'm like, what's happening? They weren't getting my jokes. I mean, everything was different. Yellow pages? What are you talking about, yellow pages? Everything was much more different. So this was such a beautiful opportunity. You did not feel that way.
Yeah.
But it was such a beautiful opportunity, Ken, for me because there again, I dived into studying personalities. I studied the DISC personality profile. That's not to box people in, but to kind of see where we fit in within those profiles. I started to see my own strengths, my own weaknesses. How would I have to really switch gears between my own traits in order to be able to relate to Ken, or to be able to downgrade or downscale my personality in order to hear someone else? And so I deeply studied personality, psychology, communication. And for quite a while, I taught classes that were called Communication, the Key to the Success of My Business. Really, any business can. And that's how I ended up getting into speaking, coaching, training, doing workshops, alongside with continuing to study God's Word, to study spirituality on very different realms. Because to me, it's all about unifying in my work. I shouldn't even say to me, my work, my mission I've been ordained with or given is about unifying the people of this world.
Yeah.
But of course, that starts within our own household. We don't have to be
Absolutely.
fancy. No, it starts within our own person. And then as we reach out and demonstrate these teachings, emulating, so to speak, the teachings.
Yeah. You'd mentioned it that before we started about us being piece. We are in different pieces. And as we began to unify our own self through our journey and so forth, we become less fragmented. And you'd mentioned one of the most powerful things about learning to live in the present. That is the key to all of this, because when we go back into the past, shame and guilt and all those things, those other programmers reside there. Then when we go into the future, there's a couple of programmers there as well, anxiety and all the other different things that are waiting. And we have no knowledge of that. But what we do have is a knowledge of the present, where we are. When we check in, when we become the observer is the one, when we are in that state, that's when the journey begins. That's when we began to look into self, make the adjustments, see those things. The fact that you were studying personalities, I'm so fascinated by your approach to life and growing up, if you will. I find it very fascinating that you were bringing all of these tools, powerful stuff in your being, in your space, to help you to understand self first and then how to navigate with other personalities and so forth. And as you began to do this in your life and you found yourself teaching in all of the different things, speaking and so forth, with all of that knowledge, all of that data that you're getting, because everyone thinks that life is so rosy and you don't get into any problems or whatever. And it's absolutely the total opposite. Talk to us about some of those things that you started to discover about you as you were excavating and going deeper. You talked about personalities and so forth and understanding one's personality. What did you begin to see about you and some of those things that you had to address as an individual, those traumas, and what tools did you utilize in your life, having access to all of these other tools that you're familiar with? What did you use? And as you found those dark spaces in your life to help you through?
So what I found is the deeper that I ended up moving into the self, the deeper I started to align with my soul self beyond the conditioned self or impressed self from, again, the father of the house of our mother and father into then further on. I started to recognize the more I studied the self, the less there was the self. It really became much more in with the other self. The other self and I are one, right? So that was part of that. And do not lose, however, as I was sharing with you at the beginning, Ken, do not lose that part of my own self that nonetheless has the right to decide. So for me, it has always been and continues to be the purpose of why I'm here, what I was really ordained to do as I reveal and peel back the layers. But within that, there was the tendency to lose my personality self.
Yes.
My own self and the personality self, and I would being very passionate about what I do and how I do it. That tendency is still something I will probably work with until the day I croak. Because to be able to just be with that part that doesn't do, that doesn't help, that does not reach out, required a lot of stillness, required a lot of calm, a lot of acceptance that through presence, and that's the first habit in my book, High Performance Without Pain, and that's what I coach my clients also. Presence, it's not the problem that we're going to work with. It is the consciousness that created the problem. Once we work with presence, the presence will transform the problem. So we don't focus on the problem. So as I was going back and forth to Europe, as I was going through a divorce that I tried to do in a very amiable, peaceful way, not by hating my ex-husband, but by loving him through that divorce, as I was the one that realized I had to make that decision. I can either attend to him or I can start to continue to attend to the whole world. Right. So I was the one that initiated that divorce and that was trying to do the divorce in a very loving way. Right. So within that, I had to make that decision. You have to love yourself as much as you love everyone else, as much as you can. It's as much as you can easily see what other people need, because I so easily would see what people needed or what animals. I had a friend one time, I had 4 boy kitties and I called them the boys. And when they would, because they were in and out kitties. And so when they would come in, they would meow to me and everything. And then my friend saw that a few days and she was saying, you already do for them what they want before they even say anything. So I was in that servant leadership position for a long time or forever on end without realizing it. So when you have that tendency and you can see, you have to really learn to step back into me. And the more I step back into me, I could see them yet again from a more observant perspective, really as the observer going into deeper stillness. And I went through a very dark night of the soul when my body was starting to have a lot of symptoms. My body was breaking down as I was during the latter years of my life. I was attending to my parents with my brother and I. Sisters were only peripherally involved, and I would do keynotes over there. I would organize seminars over there while I was the caseworker with my parents. And I had to yell at the doctors, applaud the doctors, fire the caregivers, applaud the caregivers. I had to do. I never knew what I would arrive at. So one time I came back and I realized one of the caregivers was an alcoholic. Wow. My mom had Parkinson's and my dad was very elderly. They were very dependent on advocacy, and that's one thing I've always been, is an advocate for those that are unable to do so themselves. So that rendered me powerless, so to speak, physically, as I at one point was preparing to do a keynote here in California, and I could barely move. The book I was holding was falling out of my hands. I couldn't walk barely. I couldn't talk barely. Somehow I pulled that keynote off just through sheer will and discipline, which I've always had a lot of. And then came a phase of a year or two just going into the silence just doing very little, just being present with what was presenting itself, which was a lot of nerve pain, a lot of symptoms, a lot of my body. I had worn down. Being a high energy person takes a lot to wear that down, and I'd worn that down. And so I became increasingly present to what was happening, to the spaces in between. And that's what ended up leading to this book, High Performance Without Pain.
Yeah.
The 7-step blueprint to reclaim, and that's what I was doing, my vibrant life to get even more done. And that was all about then realizing, yeah, I can make life happen. And I was really good at that.
Yeah.
It's not what I'm supposed to do, Daniela. I'm supposed to work within the plan of God, within your own God self within, and to allow spirit to support you as you move forward with the plan. Because it's a symbiotic relationship. You're doing it just by force,
Yeah.
not the whole time. And then later on, that came to this book, Gliding You Home, A Dolphin Stream of a New Earth, which was even furthering to go from a force state into a flow state.
Yeah. Guys, if you're listening to us, we're going to provide the links so you can purchase the books. It's very important that you get books. And I tell people we have to learn to change our paradigm as to gifts that we give to people. Offer them books that is aligned in their need. And we have an author that has some insights into a couple of things. And you guys purchase her books and give them out as presents to people and tell them when they come to the book, come expecting, and they'll get whatever they need. So here you are. You're an author. You're one that have gone. You had to learn about servicing the self first. And that's a hard lesson for us to do when we are givers and so forth. And as we learn to retreat and begin to service the self and learn to love the self, we gain strength, insights, and all the different things as we're going there. You are here today. And I've asked this question to very few people, but when I feel nudged to ask, I'll usually ask. Because, being around nature, one becomes open to, you're an empath early in life. And that's a great teacher for an empath. And music is another, the arts and all those different things. You're here 2025. What is it you're being is sensing for us, that is the collective outside of you? What is it that you're sensing that we have need of?
Well, first of all, even though it may be contrary to what people are feeling, I feel that there is nothing to be afraid of as we move within our own personal mastery. And as we stop to continue to make other people our gods, above and beyond political orientations, it is time for us to really move inward and to listen to that seed, or seed, SEED, of our soul, and feel guided to where we are meant to serve and where we are meant to go in order to help humanity's consciousness rise. And that starts with one ocean at a time, and the ocean being our own personal consciousness and our own personal evolution as we rise as some of us, the light workers, the guides of humanity. So within our own lives, to really become still and to dive into the sacred wisdom and have the courage, having courageous trust to be willing to switch gears into something that is really that is in greater alignment. And that oftentimes is not the same thing that we're doing. Maybe maybe version there. So we can start to create and build momentum within the new world that some of us are building, where holistic success is possible, not at the cost of who we are, but because of who we are. That is inviting all of ourselves into that and leaves us where we're able to leave from fragmentation into our full wisdom, into spiritual alignment. So what I'm feeling is to turn away from false gods and to really move inward and trust the self that you've hopefully been building. And everyone has been building it to a certain degree, to continue to feed that self so you can hear from an unconditioned self in this moment, in present time. And that's the only power we have. make decisions from that self, not from a fear of what the future may bring when you watch the news or the past has brought to, but to where is your soul vision guiding you now.
Daniela, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment. This has been a really good one. All you guys, we're going to provide everything for you to get to her. The books are important. As I said, within those books house wisdom, knowledge, and insight that will free you. And come expecting and you will receive as you are reading those books. Again, Daniela, thank you so much for coming to Threads of Enlightenment.
Oh, it's been my pleasure to share with you and your audience, and I really enjoyed the style of your questioning and the wisdom that you shared.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Threads of Enlightenment with Ken Primus. Hopefully you're now feeling more empowered to overcome the challenges in your life, whatever they may be. Share that inspiration with others by telling them about this podcast, rating it, and of course, remember to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. For more connection, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Threads of Enlightenment. Until next time, stay enlightened.